He once called me his second mother. Now he walks past me like a stranger. Hello everyone, my name is Grace, and I turned 56 last spring in the soft humidity of Charleston, South Carolina. The kind that makes the magnolia trees bloom like they're trying to outshine each other. I live in a small yellow house on the corner of Pine and Willow Street. The same one my late husband, Tom, painted the summer before he got sick. Some mornings, when I pass the chipped white fence, I swear I can still hear his laughter, deep, full, and kind. But before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far our stories travel. I've always believed people carry storms inside them. Some come to destroy, others to cleanse. Mine arrived quietly. One decision, one act of kindness that changed everything I knew about trust. After Tom died, I poured what was left of me into a little bakery downtown. It wasn't fancy, just a narrow shop with faded yellow curtains and the smell of cinnamon that clung to your clothes. It was my therapy, my purpose, and my prayer all at once. Locals came for the blueberry muffins, but I think they came just as much for the smile I forced myself to wear. That's where Ethan entered my story. He was my son Michael's best friend, the kind of young man who seemed always on the brink of something big. He'd come into the bakery after college classes, talking about dreams of starting his own business, changing the world, building something that mattered. His eyes burned with the kind of hope only the young seem to carry. Sometimes, when he talked, I'd see flashes of Tom, the same restless ambition, the same hunger to prove himself. It was like watching a ghost you love walk through the door every day. Ethan didn't come from much. His mother worked double shifts at a nursing home. His father gone since he was a boy. He'd sit at my counter late into the evening, laptop open, coffee growing cold, pitching ideas about apps, sustainability, community projects, all the things I barely understood but admired deeply. He'd tell me, "Miss Grace, one day you'll see my name on something big, and when that happens, I'll buy every muffin in this place." I laughed, but part of me believed him. After all, I knew what it felt like to want something better, to chase meaning when the world gives you loss. Maybe that's why I started to care too much. Maybe I saw in him a chance to give someone else the kind of belief I used to get from Tom. But belief, I would learn, can cost more than money. Ethan came to the bakery one night, just before closing. It was raining hard, the kind of southern rain that doesn't fall, it pours. He looked nervous, fidgeting with his sleeve, eyes darting between me and the counter. "Miss Grace," he said softly, "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." He told me about his new idea, a small tech startup that would connect local businesses with customers in real time. It sounded complicated, but his passion was contagious. He had that spark, that fire people get before they change their lives. He needed a small investment, he said, just enough to get things off the ground. He'd already been turned down by banks. Too young, no credit, no collateral. I remember the rain dripping from his hair, the desperation in his voice. Something inside me stirred. Maybe it was empathy. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe I just wanted to matter again, to feel like I could help someone take flight, even if I never got to myself. So without telling my son, I took what little savings I had, money I'd been keeping for bakery repairs and a small cushion for emergencies, and handed it over. It wasn't much in the world of business, but to me, it was everything. He hugged me so tightly that night. "You won't regret this, Miss Grace," he said. "You're part of this dream now." For weeks, I lived off that sentence. "You're part of this dream now." I'd wake up early, open the bakery, and imagine his business thriving, my investment growing. both of us lifting each other up in ways life rarely allows. But slowly, things began to shift. His visits grew shorter, then less frequent. Calls turned to texts. Texts turned to silence. When I'd ask how things were going, he'd reply with quick optimism. Almost there. Big meeting soon. Don't worry, you'll be proud. I believed him. Of course I did. Because when you choose to trust someone, doubt feels like betrayal. Months passed. The bakery's old oven broke down, and I had no savings to fix it. I borrowed from friends, took on extra catering orders, stretched every dollar. Some nights I'd sit in that quiet kitchen, staring at the empty cash register, wondering what Tom would say if he saw me now. "You always lead with your heart, Grace," he'd say. "Just be sure you've got enough left to find your way home." But I was already too far down the road of belief to turn back. I kept telling myself, he'll come through, he has to. One evening, I received a short message. "Been crazy busy, Miss Grace. Big launch coming soon. We'll visit after." It was the last message I got for almost 2 years. Those 2 years felt like holding your breath underwater, waiting for something to surface that never does. I tried not to resent him. I told myself he was young, focused, driven. But the truth is, I missed the boy who once sat in my bakery talking about dreams. I missed feeling like someone needed me again. And in that quiet ache, I began to see a truth I'd been avoiding. Sometimes kindness becomes a disguise for loneliness. One afternoon, as I was sweeping the floor, I caught my reflection in the bakery window. Tired eyes, flour-dusted hands, a woman still waiting for a promise to return. The street outside glimmered with sunlight after rain, and I whispered to myself, hope can blind you just as much as love. I didn't know it then, but that whisper, that small broken truth, would soon echo through everything that came next. 2 years can pass quietly, but they leave echoes. After Ethan's last message, the days at the bakery began to blur together. Sunlight spilling through the window in the morning, the hum of the old refrigerator, the smell of cinnamon that clung to the curtains. Customers came and went, but my heart wasn't in it anymore. I'd bake on autopilot, measuring sugar and regret in equal parts. The silence from Ethan stretched long enough to turn hope brittle. At first, I excused it. He's busy, Grace. Startups take time. Then months turned into seasons, and excuses ran out. I still kept his number in my phone, reading our old messages when I couldn't sleep. "You're part of this dream now," he'd said. I whispered it sometimes like a prayer, like maybe the words would bring him back. When the oven broke down, I sat on the flour-dusted floor and cried. Not because of the oven, but because I finally realized I didn't have anyone left to call for help. My son Michael lived 2 states away and called once a week if I was lucky. He'd warned me not to mix friendship with money, and pride kept me from admitting he'd been right. A landlord raised the rent that winter. I started doing early morning catering for a hotel across town, setting out coffee urns and trays of croissants before sunrise, then rushing back to open my bakery at 8. My hands ached from kneading dough, my knees from standing too long, but routine became my armor. Movement left less room for memory. Still, every time the bell over the bakery door jingled, a small part of me looked up, expecting to see him. Once, a young man with dark hair walked in, wearing the same gray hoodie Ethan used to wear, and my breath caught in my throat. But it wasn't him. Just another stranger craving coffee and warmth. Charleston kept moving while I stood still. The city changed. New shops, new tourists, new faces. I watched young couples through the bakery window and wondered if they knew how fragile faith could be. The world teaches you to keep giving, but never warns you what it costs. One Sunday after church, I stopped by the grocery store and caught two women whispering near the produce aisle. "Did you see that new tech company on King Street? Local boy made it big. Offices everywhere now." I didn't think much of it until I heard the name. Ethan Keller. My hands froze around a carton of strawberries. I listened as they talked about a billboard going up downtown, a young entrepreneur being featured in magazines, interviews on morning shows, the kind of success people dream about. I went home and searched his name on my old laptop. The screen filled with headlines. Local visionary brings jobs to Charleston. From garage to glory, the story of Ethan Keller. There he was, smiling in a crisp suit, eyes shining the same way they had when he sat at my counter years ago. Except now, his smile was surrounded by wealth, confidence, power. I read every article, looking for a line that mentioned the people who helped him start, the mentors, the believers, the ones who gave him his first chance. But my name wasn't there, not even a whisper. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark kitchen. The rain outside sounded like applause, cruel and endless. For days afterward, I wrestled with two versions of him. The boy who once scraped his shoes on my doorstep, and the man on the billboard who claimed he'd built everything alone. My mind told me to be proud. My heart refused. I wanted to write him, to remind him of who stood behind him when no one else did. But pride is a stubborn thing. It whispers that silence protects dignity, even when silence hurts more. So I kept working. I fixed the oven with borrowed money. I smiled at customers I didn't feel like smiling at. I told myself forgiveness was easier than bitterness. But every success story I heard about him scraped another layer off my heart. By the third year, the bakery's lease expired, and I decided not to renew it. Business had slowed, and my body was tired. On the last day, I baked one final batch of blueberry muffins, the same kind Ethan loved. I wrapped a dozen, placed them on the counter, and stared at them until the room blurred. When I locked the door for the last time, it felt like burying a part of myself. I didn't know it then, but endings have a way of leading you exactly where you need to go, even when it feels like loss. Because life, in its strange symmetry, was already preparing a reunion I never asked for. When my bakery closed, I thought that was the last chapter. But life has a strange way of folding old pages back open. A few months after locking those doors for good, I started taking whatever work I could find, cleaning houses, organizing closets, caring for elderly neighbors. It was honest work, and it kept my hands busy enough that my mind didn't wander where it shouldn't. But the ache never really left. It just quieted under the rhythm of ordinary days. Then, one morning, on my way to a client's house, I saw it again, a billboard on King Street. Ethan's face stared down from it, bright and confident, framed by the words, "Innovation begins at home." I stood there, traffic buzzing behind me, watching the smile I used to know so well. My breath caught, not from anger, but from disbelief at how small my part in his story had become. He'd built an empire out of the same dream he'd once spilled over coffee and pastry crumbs in my bakery. And I, the woman who'd believed first, was invisible in the glow of his success. For weeks, I avoided that street, taking the long way to every appointment. But Charleston is small, and pride doesn't erase proximity. His company's logo started appearing everywhere, on buses, ads, coffee cups. It was as if the city itself was determined to remind me of him. One afternoon, my son Michael called. He'd seen a television interview with Ethan. "Mom," he said carefully, "isn't that the kid you used to talk about? The one who said you invested in his idea?" I kept my voice light. "That was a long time ago, sweetheart. People grow. He hesitated. Did he ever pay you back? I changed the subject, asked about his kids. It felt better than admitting the truth. No, he hadn't. Not a dollar. Not a thank you. Not even a memory. But something shifted inside me that night. It wasn't bitterness exactly. It was clarity. I realized how long I'd carried that hurt like a secret debt. How many smiles had been weighed down by disappointment. I told myself it was time to let go. I began journaling again, writing letters I'd never send. I wrote about the bakery, about Tom, about Ethan's bright eyes when he spoke about dreams. I even wrote about my own mistakes, the need to be needed, the loneliness I'd hidden behind kindness. And slowly, forgiveness began to take shape, not as a gift to him, but as a kind of freedom for myself. Still, every so often, I wondered what I'd say if I ever saw him again. Would I be angry? Would I cry? Would I even recognize the man behind the fame? Fate, as always, had its own answer waiting. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday in late autumn. The air had turned crisp, and the leaves along the battery looked like fire caught mid-breath. I'd been hired by an agency that sent housekeepers to high-end clients. The jobs were quiet, the pay steady. That morning, the address on my schedule caught my eye. Harbor Lane, the expensive part of town where the houses had tall gates and ocean views. I didn't think much of it as I parked my old car by the curb and checked in with the house manager. When the gate opened, the first thing I saw was the front garden, sleek, manicured, nothing like the messy wildflowers Tom used to love. I followed the path toward the entrance, and that's when I saw the brass nameplate by the door, Keller Residence. For a moment, everything inside me stilled. I told myself it couldn't be. Keller was a common enough name. But when the door opened, I heard a voice that confirmed what my eyes refused to believe. "Hi, come in," the woman said, smiling politely. "Mr. Keller's out for meetings, but he'll be back soon. You can start in the kitchen." My legs felt heavy as I stepped inside. The house smelled faintly of cedar and coffee, just like the mornings in my bakery years ago. I set down my cleaning supplies and looked around. Every surface gleamed, every object perfectly placed. And then, on the far wall, a framed photo caught my attention. Ethan, standing beside a group of suited men, holding an award, the same confident grin plastered across his face. I stared at it until the world around me blurred. He returned just after noon. I was polishing the marble countertop when the front door clicked open and footsteps echoed across the tile. My back stiffened. I didn't turn immediately. I wasn't sure I could trust my expression. "Hello?" he called out. When I faced him, he froze. His eyes narrowed for a heartbeat, then widened in shock, or maybe guilt. "Miss Grace?" His voice sounded softer than I remembered, but time does that. It dulls edges. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he forced a small laugh. Wow, it's been years." "Yes," I said quietly. "It has." He looked different. Tailored suit, watch that probably cost more than my car. But beneath all that polish was the same restless energy. He gestured vaguely toward the floor. "I didn't know you were with the agency." I smiled, though it didn't reach my eyes. Life takes people where it needs to. He rubbed the back of his neck, clearly uncomfortable. "I've been meaning to reach out, really. Things just got crazy after the launch." 3 years of crazy? The words slipped out before I could stop them. He flinched. "I should have kept in touch. You were such a help back then." I kept wiping the counter. "I suppose so." Silence hung heavy between us, the kind that says everything without a word. Finally, he muttered, "You must think terribly of me." I looked at him then, really looked. "No, Ethan, I think life teaches us who we are. That's lesson enough." He nodded, eyes darting away. guilt etched into every line of his face. When the job was done, I packed my things. As I turned to leave, I paused by the photo on the wall. "You've done well," I said softly. He swallowed hard. "If there's anything I can do to..." I stopped him with a raised hand. "Just remember who believed in you when no one else did." Then I walked out into the afternoon light, the sea breeze cold and clean against my skin. I didn't cry, not this time. I felt lighter, because I realized the woman he once knew no longer needed his apology to define her worth. Driving home, I rolled down the window and let the wind carry everything away. The debt, the disappointment, the years of waiting. Sometimes strength isn't loud. Sometimes it's simply walking out of a house that once held your pain and leaving the door gently closed behind you. I never thought I would see that day coming. The day when I would finally feel free from the weight Ethan had unknowingly carried into my life. And yet it arrived in the quietest way possible, with no fanfare and no announcement. Just a simple, ordinary Tuesday. After leaving the Keller house, I kept busy with small jobs around Charleston. My hands grew calloused from scrubbing, my knees ached from bending and lifting, but the work grounded me. There was a kind of solace in the rhythm, a steady reminder that life moves forward, even when people do not. Each home I entered, each floor I polished, every dish I stacked, reminded me that dignity exists not in recognition, but in the work we do, the life we lead, and the integrity we carry quietly. A few weeks after the encounter, I found myself thinking less about him and more about myself. I had lived too long in the shadow of unacknowledged effort, letting my heart linger in the past while my body and mind remained tethered to what-ifs and could-have-beens. I realized that his recognition, or lack thereof, was never what defined me. What defined me was how I continued to show up for the world, even when the world didn't notice. And yet, the thought of him lingered, not as resentment, but as unfinished business. I couldn't erase the years, the money, the hope, or the trust I had given him. They were woven into the fabric of me, and in that weaving was the proof that I had lived with courage, even when it seemed foolish. I decided I had to give that lesson one last chance to speak. Not to him, not for vengeance, but for closure, for affirmation of the self I had fought to preserve. So one evening I wrote a note, a simple one. I didn't think about length or style. I just wrote what I had carried silently for years. Never forget who believed in you when you were nobody. I left it on his kitchen counter before I resigned from the agency, choosing to close that chapter quietly. The words were gentle but deliberate, carrying the weight of experience without anger. They were a whisper of truth that would stand long after I was gone from his world. The next morning, my phone rang. The caller ID flashed an unfamiliar number, but the voice on the other end was unmistakable. Ethan. "Grace," he said, his voice unsteady, almost unrecognizable in its vulnerability. I read your note. I didn't interrupt." I let him stumble over his words, the hesitation, the guilt, the shame. I could hear it all. And I could also hear the tremor of someone confronting the consequences of choices they had long ignored. "I don't know what to say," he finally admitted. "You don't have to say anything," I replied softly. "I just wanted you to know something you forgot along the way. Belief doesn't expire just because someone grows distant. You'll understand that when it matters to you, and I hope you will." There was silence for a moment, thick and heavy, but it wasn't the silence of tension. It was the silence of understanding. I realized then that closure doesn't always come with apologies or reconciliation. Sometimes it comes from witnessing a life continue with grace and quiet strength, a life that refuses to be diminished by another's neglect. We spoke briefly after that, cautiously, like two people tiptoeing around fragile ground. He admitted, finally, that he had been reckless with my generosity, that he had been blind to what he had received, and that he regretted the years he had taken for granted. But there was no begging, no pleading, no attempt to rewrite history. He simply spoke the truth he had finally faced, and in doing so, offered me a gift far greater than any repayment could ever provide: honesty. I listened and let the words wash over me. I realized something I hadn't understood fully before. Strength isn't always loud. It doesn't always demand recognition or applause. Strength is the quiet decision to preserve your dignity, to honor your own effort, and to allow life to teach its lessons in its own time. My strength had always been there, woven into the daily acts of survival and care, and it didn't require him to acknowledge it. After the call, I made a decision. I would no longer let my worth be tied to the recognition of others, nor would I dwell in the shadows of past disappointment. I began to focus on myself, on the things I had delayed or neglected while waiting for the world to notice me. I reopened a small catering business from home, naming it Second Chances. Not because I needed to give others opportunities, but because I wanted to celebrate the opportunities life had quietly given me to rebuild, to rise, and to reclaim my narrative. Word spread slowly through friends and neighbors, as it always does in Charleston. Orders came in, sometimes from people I barely knew, sometimes from familiar faces who had watched me struggle and now cheered from the sidelines. But the work was its own reward, the satisfaction of creating, of nurturing, of seeing something I poured myself into flourish on its own terms. I often think about Ethan, not with bitterness, not with lingering grief, but with a strange kind of peace. He reminded me of the fragility of trust, the danger of misplaced priorities, and the resilience that emerges when we are tested. And now, when I look back, I understand that the encounter, the silence, and even the neglect were part of the story that shaped me into a woman who could stand without needing validation. Strength, I have learned, isn't about loud declarations or dramatic gestures. It's in the quiet, steady persistence to live with integrity, to care without expectation, and to forgive when it is easier to harbor resentment. It is in the small victories that feel invisible to the world, but monumental to the soul. As I close my eyes, some nights, exhausted but fulfilled, I no longer dwell on what I lost. Instead, I remember what I built: resilience, courage, and the understanding that my value has never been contingent on anyone else's recognition. Ethan's success, his wealth, his fame, they never defined me. What defined me was what I did with the trust I gave, the heart I opened, and the hope I carried, even when it seemed foolish. And so, I move forward, lighter and steadier. The world is still imperfect, still unpredictable, but I carry within me a quiet flame, one that has survived loss, betrayal, and disappointment, yet refuses to dim. That flame is my own, nurtured not by validation, but by life itself. Sometimes, late at night, when the streets are silent and the city exhales, I whisper to myself, strength isn't loud. It's what survives when everything else breaks. And I know now, with every fiber of my being, that it's true.